G'day and welcome to the Patently Strategic Podcast, where we discuss all things at the intersection of business, technology, and patents. This podcast is a monthly discussion among experts in the field of patenting. It is for inventors, founders, and IP professionals alike, established or aspiring. And in this month's episode, we're talking about one of the most important and most misunderstood questions in innovation policy. What role does intellectual property play in getting new medicines from the lab bench to patients? This question has never been more timely. Biopharmaceutical innovation sits at the center of some of our biggest public policy debates. Drug pricing, access, generic competition, university research, venture funding, AI-driven discovery, follow-on research, and the future of biotech startups. And in the middle of those debates, patents are often reduced to slogans like patent monopolies and evergreening, and are assigned the political blame for high drug prices and limited patient access to medical breakthroughs. But the real system is much more complicated. Modern drug development is extraordinarily expensive, uncertain, regulated, and risky. A promising discovery may begin in a university lab, move through a startup, require venture financing, depend on partnerships with larger pharmaceutical companies, survive years of clinical testing, and then still face manufacturing, approval, reimbursement, safety monitoring, and market adoption hurdles. Along that path, intellectual property is not just a prize at the end. It can be the asset that allows investment, collaboration, disclosure, licensing, specialization, and commercialization to happen in the first place. At the same time, the public has a legitimate interest in access, affordability, competition, and generic entry. So the policy challenge is understanding how the system works, what incentives are actually doing, and what can go wrong when lawmakers, courts, and pundits oversimplify the trade-offs. To help us truly understand the critical role of patent protections in the biopharmaceutical ecosystem, and what prevailing narratives mean for investors, startups, and biotech R&D, we're sitting down with Dr. Heiden, one of the leading thinkers working at the intersection of intellectual property, innovation strategy, and life sciences policy. Bo lives and breathes this space like few others on the planet. He's the co-director of the Berkeley Policy Institute's Eira Initiative, a nonprofit applied policy research initiative that seeks to ground innovation policy in the biopharmaceutical, medical device, and life sciences industries in fact-based and economically informed analysis that moves beyond narrative, rhetoric, and anecdote. Bo also serves as the executive director at the Tushar Strategic Initiative for Technology Leadership at Berkeley's Haas School of Business, is the co-director of the Center for Intellectual Property at the University of Gothenburg, and the co-chair of the Technology, Innovation, and Intellectual Property program at the Classical Liberal Institute at the NYU School of Law. Previously, he was a visiting professor at UC Berkeley and innovation director for the Qatar Science and Technology Park, where he was responsible for driving innovation strategy and intellectual property policy. Over the past 10 years, Bo has also managed over 100 innovation projects with industry, university research institutes, healthcare providers, and startup ventures. Throughout this conversation, we'll cover drug price and access concerns as they pertain to patents, the economic realities that make drug development a uniquely risky investment problem, the CliffsNotes version of why the modern biotech system emerged so strongly in the United States, what policymakers often miss in narratives around evergreening and patent monopolies, and how those narratives may now be pushing policy in directions that could fully undermine the very startup and R&D ecosystem we all depend on for advancements in medicine. We'll also get into the Supreme Court's recent Hikma decision and what it means for skinny labels, induced infringement, and generic competition. And then we'll close with practical takeaways on two of the hottest areas in the market, AI-driven drug discovery and the evolving GLP-1 regulatory and generic landscape. This is a big conversation, but the through line is simple. If we want more medicines, better medicines, and broader access to medicines, we need to understand the innovation system clearly before we start rewriting the rules. Now, before jumping in with Bo, we'd like to take you to the next installment of the Mossoff Minute, a monthly segment that builds on our Patent Wars episode and features short conversations with Professor Adam Mossoff, providing updates and quick takes on movements in patent reform, significant court rulings, innovation policy happenings, and occasional Star Wars references.
It's an important and exciting year with the 250th anniversary of the foundation of our country, the first country in human history, founded on the ideals of individual rights, the rule of law, limited government, and free markets, has led to an incredible flourishing society, the city on the hill that is aspirational to the rest of the world. We often forget, though, that the patent system was very much part of this break from England, a break from royal privilege grants, of relationships with the crown and with the leaders and the powers of various countries, America took very seriously that all men are created equal, and therefore everyone should have access to these vital property rights. They believed this, and they applied it also to the protection of patents by recognizing that patents and copyright should be secured in the Constitution, the very first time in human history that a country's constitution recognized the protection of these important intellectual property rights, and that these should be accessible to all people as property rights. This has been called the democratization of invention. This is what leads to people like Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell and all of those incredible innovators that we learn about in school that form the foundation of our flourishing society, our explosive growth in our innovation economy, and the model that the United States has become for the rest of the world over the past 250 years, and hopefully for even more centuries to come.
Thanks, Adam. We're also publishing clips from the Mossoff Minute as short-form videos on Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and TikTok. You can check out these shorts and follow us at Aurora Patents on all 3 platforms. Thrilled to have you here today, Bo. We are big fans of anybody out there who's deep in the trenches and tirelessly fighting the good fight on behalf of innovators who are all too often finding themselves in a David and Goliath kind of battle, but unfortunately with a broken slingshot. So thanks for doing what you do, and thanks for joining us today.
No problem. I'm tall, so I struggle in the trench. I got to really bend over to miss the fire. So
to send you a helmet. So I'd like to start a little with your background and your current focus. So could you just start by telling us a little bit about your work at the Berkeley Policy Institute and the Eira Initiative, and what drew you away from professional European basketball and into the wild world of biotech innovation policy, just in case that's not an obvious career transition for anyone listening?
you mean it's not a straight line? Yeah, I've noticed that.
I don't think that's no.
Well, the Berkeley Policy Institute is an initiative that was created by David Teese, who's the famous scholar entrepreneur from UC Berkeley. Just to tackle things like these issues with a empirical focus, but also to support interdisciplinary activity. And universities talk a lot about interdisciplinary work, but we all like to run off to our own departments. So creating institutes like the Berkeley Policy Institute sometimes makes it easier to draw all these different groups together, which I enjoy. I have a background in engineering and technology management and economics, and sometimes I play a lawyer on TV, so I hang out with a lot of them. So I like to put all this together, and this is definitely what we try to do at the Eira Initiative, which is really to ground innovation policy in relation to biopharma or medical devices in the life science industry in general, in fact-based, economically informed analysis. We want to move beyond the narrative and the rhetoric and the anecdote, that, as you know, those travel very quickly and very easily. It takes a lot of effort to bring out the facts and get them on a higher ground. And I think in today's world, we need that even more than ever.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a huge challenge to, tackle that, because those sound bites are quick and quippy, and they do travel very well. And the data is sort of, harder to package in the digestible format to combat it. So it is very much an uphill battle, but it's actually a good transition. This is just a side note, not so much of a question here, but in my show prep, I also read that you're the co-director of the Center for Intellectual Property at the University of Gothenburg. One of your many titles, I actually don't know when you sleep, but keep up good work. But I read that the mission there is to transform knowledge into wealth and welfare, and I just want to let you know that I love that. I think that is truly one of the most succinct descriptions that I've ever read on the fundamental purpose of patents. Right, like we're gonna be publishing this episode ahead of the 4th of July, and we always try to take this time of year to highlight and draw attention to how the U.S. Constitution really democratized innovation when it gave individuals the ability to tokenize the fruits of their mind and turn those into transactable property rights, and the explosive growth of innovation that ensued. on a scope and scale of the world it just never seen before. And, we did a great podcast with Professor Mossoff on this, but you managed to nail that in 6 words: transform knowledge into wealth and welfare. That's wonderful. Bumper sticker that, T-shirt it, use that.
It should be merchandising. You're right.
You really should. You really should.
I have to say that we've been around for 25 years at SIP, and you always revisit your branding and your mission statements and whatnot. I've always liked that one because it does hit at the heart that knowledge is the most important resource, but it's not that easy to create and control and generate value out of. So so that's why you need intellectual property to force this to happen. And it does take a little bit of thought to see the link there, which we'll get into today.
For sure.
People think blocking people from things is bad, but not when the thing wouldn't exist without this exclusivity, right? So
yes, absolutely.
Bumper sticker is easily. So
no, but hey, that transform knowledge into wealth and welfare. You could be transforming that mission statement into wealth, maybe. Tokenize that guy. So I just realized that I cut you off before you explained how you were able to make the transition from professional European basketball into life science innovation policy, and I want to make sure that I can fuse that back in, so it didn't seem like I steamrolled over that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I joke about that. I usually give a joke that says I used to play professional basketball. That's why I'm so tall. It's you can see people like, that's not the right direction. Like, but it's not normal. I tended to be much more of an academic person when I was young. I just grew very tall, and I like to compete. So I got pretty good at basketball, and when I was in college, I decided, well, I was good, but I was, how do you say, I couldn't defy gravity enough, so I wasn't able to play in the NBA. So I went to Europe to play, which was great. I got to visit different places and meet different people, live in different countries, and be competitive. But because I played basketball in college while I went to school, I liked this mix of physical, competitive activity and studying. And I studied electrical engineering to begin with. So then I did a master's degree while I was playing in Sweden, and and started my PhD while I was still playing in technology management and economics, focusing on the knowledge economy, right, and how we transform knowledge into wealth and welfare, like we talked about. Mm-hmm. So the body starts to fail, and then I had to lean back on the brain. But that's a little bit of the story. It is unusual, but for me, I like doing both. And as I get older, I miss the competitive basketball. I think everyone who retires from the sport feels that way.
I think I heard somewhere that you had a pretty sweet jump shot that some point you referred to yourself as the poor man's Larry Bird.
Yeah, that's what people want to say. Well, how did you play? I'm like, yeah, it was like a poor man's Larry Bird, like the triple double type thing before everyone could do it. And and maybe I say to the young people now, a poor man's Doncic. But now that like Jokic is a kind of bigger guy that could pass and stuff, he's great. I tried to play like that one, but not as good as him, but that type of style. But now a lot of people do it. So everyone's shooting 3-pointers. I used to be a big guy. Shooting threes was, incredible. Now it's no big deal. So that's the game. The game changes, right?
So, innovation policy landscape is wide, and as you know, its needs are many. It's a very long list, right? Enablement, eligibility, injunctive relief, efficient infringement, the PTAB. You have a very well-funded lobby and narrative machine that's, fueled by the big tech companies that are trying to burn the ladders that they use to climb up on. The list goes on. Why focus on biopharma, med devices, and life sciences? And what gap in the current life science innovation policy landscape is Eira trying to fill?
That's a good question. When you talk about biopharma, you're talking about healthcare, right? People's health and well-being, the longevity. This is very important. I know I like my iPhone and telecommunications, but this actually hits much deeper. And you can see that this is, all the other technology issues are discussed in policy, but healthcare, the cost of healthcare, access to healthcare, innovation, all this stuff really, people can resonate with that. And so I think, so biopharma innovation is, critical for both health outcomes and economic development, right? So in the U.S. we lead in our healthcare outcomes in many regards, and we also the pharma section, the biopharma is an economic leader as well. And the thing that really pushed me there was that policymakers are being subjected to an intense, I would say, anti-patent narrative, and that's dangerous in this area, right? It's one thing to argue about patents on your iPhone. It's another thing to argue about on the drugs that you need, right? And so one time when I was in DC a few years ago, there were billboards up on the bus stops that said patents kill. And this was related to patents on pharmaceuticals. And I would argue that patents save. And I don't think that the people that believe that patents kill are bad people. I just think they don't understand that without the patents system, for a limited time exclusivity, that the drugs that save people's lives wouldn't exist in the first place. And that little bit of extra thinking there still seems to be difficult to get out into the public, but it means so much. So we need this kind of rational policy discussion. This is a very important mission. And so basically, we're here to be the voice of reason, supported by empirical evidence, and to see whether the evidence and this logic can outdo the narratives and the anecdotes.
So speaking of, I think that there's a lot that we can build on from, everything we sort of talked about here. And I think we're going to keep coming back to a lot of this and going deeper on what you just hit on. But I want to lay some really important foundation around what you just said in terms of some of these narrative pieces, specifically for dealing with the drug elephant in the room, right? So, we do a lot of inventor education, a lot of talks on reform and policy, but nothing, and I mean nothing, gets the general internet public riled up in comments like when we do stuff on drug patents and pricing. So, a lot of listeners hear drug patents and they immediately think, this is why drugs are expensive. So maybe if we didn't have drug patents, then, drugs would be more affordable. And, maybe in a vacuum, that's not entirely irrational. I certainly see it, people saying it a lot, hear people saying it a lot, but it's missing some incredibly important context that I'm hoping you can help us with.
Okay.
Before you can even, begin to debate whether patents make drugs expensive, I think you have to understand why drugs are investable at all. So let's tackle some of the economic realities that make drug development different. Why is drug development a uniquely risky investment problem? How does the biotech innovation model differ from, software and consumer products like you were talking about, or other technology sectors? And why are IP protections so important in life sciences?
Now, those are really important points. There is a lack of an advocate for the drug that doesn't exist, right? So there's an advocate for the drug that does exist that's somewhat expensive now, even though in a few years it'll be cheaper, much cheaper, and cheaper for the rest of humanity. There isn't an advocate for, it's a little bit like, like a magic trick. If you said, would you like this drug to be cheap right away as soon as it's approved? And people would say yes. Okay, whoop, and then it disappears. Okay, it doesn't exist anymore. So the bargain wasn't made from the very beginning, right? If you told people that we're thinking of developing a drug, it's going to be very risky. It's going to cost a lot of money. We're going to fail a lot of times, and having to wait that many years for return on investment. Sometimes I think the GLP-1 drugs took 14 years to hit the market. That is not a very easy private investment model. So to do that, you need to be able to have these types of exclusivity, and people wouldn't have gone into this rather incredible development opportunity or activity had they not known that they would have some type of exclusivity that would require some time for payback. Before then, it would become available. And I think if people were asked in the beginning, do you want us to continue, knowing that it will cost a bit for a while, everyone would say yes. But that's not where they're discussing it. They're discussing it at the point when it's right there in front of you. And that creates a bias in people's thinking, right? And it's completely understandable. It's not the same for software. The software doesn't usually have the same sunk costs. It doesn't have the same risk. It is risky, but not the same. You can change it rather easily. You talk about minimally viable products.
Yeah.
Put it out there. Customers get feedback. You change the code. This is not how it's going to happen. You have to put a lot of money in. You're going to have a lot of dead wells, so to speak, and you have to get through a lot of clinical trials. And so it's a completely different animal from this from the not necessarily telecom, but definitely from the software space. And you see it, if you ask in studies, people who do software related, IT related products don't necessarily rank patents as being very important. Where with pharmaceuticals, it's existential.
Yeah, I read somewhere, with the risk, the high R&D costs, the long development timelines, that the patents turn fragile scientific possibility into a financeable asset. And I was like, yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I was doing a little bit of research on this, and like everything, the estimates are all over the place. But when you include cost of failed programs and cost of capital over a decade plus development timeline, the average investment required to bring one successful drug from discovery to launch is estimated to be somewhere between $2 and $3 billion. Right.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? And so to put that money out as risk capital, either within a firm or in relation to startups, with the return on investment so far ahead, it's incredible that we found a way to make it work. And I think that's, again, we have to appreciate that. The drug is there. Why can't it be cheap? We have to appreciate the effort and all the institutional mechanisms that have gone into place to allow this to work, because it has worked, magnificently well. We tend, as humans, I think we like to take things for granted a bit, don't we? And it's a little hard to get into the details of this, but I think to appreciate it, you have to understand a bit of the details.
Yeah, for sure. And you were alluding to this earlier, but who's gonna fund this at scale if successful products can be copied immediately after they're approved, right? I mean, who's gonna invest $2 or $3 billion into R&D when something can be taken for nothing at the at the last stop?
And that's why the IP system is so existential. Elon Musk, he said that patents are for the weak in that famous clip with Jay Leno, and he didn't mean it in a good way, but in reality, he's correct. You are in a weak position if you've invested a lot of money and the thing that you have created, once known, can be easily imitated. Even strong pharma companies would be in a weak position without the patents. Definitely startups would be. So it's necessary in order to bring, the patents bring the new pharmaceuticals to life, right?
Yeah.
And then we can have an argument about who should pay for this and how that should be done. But let's first acknowledge the fact that without the patent system, we wouldn't have many or most of the life-saving drugs that we have.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I love that take on weaker patents. I was actually having a similar conversation with Professor Mossoff the other day about some of this, the Hikma decision and everything, and I said that the new weaker patents, I think, needs to be posing the question, like, do patents make drugs more expensive? And the answer is yes, but only in the context that they make them exist in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And the cost for a product that exists will always be higher than a cost for a product that does not.
Yeah, it's an infinite cost, isn't it? Then, and
yes,
it's not for a long period of time.
Yep.
But if you're in that window and you heard there was a new drug in relation to a condition that you have, and it's expensive, I can understand why people feel the way they do. It's not irrational, right? And so that's why we have to work to explain to people to understand this, and that we're all in this together to try to do this in the best possible way.
Yep, 100%. So, one of your goals at Eira, as you mentioned, is to ground innovation policy in fact-based and economically informed analysis. And I think we could benefit from more of that, actually, in all parts of life, but especially in our public discourse around patents. And history can be a really great teacher in that analysis. in our Why Patents Exist episode, we talk about how the chem revolution started in Germany in the 19th century, but pharma revolution shifts to the U.S. Industrial revolution starts in England, but shifts to the U.S. Computer revolution doesn't shift anywhere, starts in the U.S., and so does the biotech revolution. Can you sort of give us the Cliff Notes history of the modern U.S. biotech system and the critical ingredients that allowed it to take root and flourish?
I knew you were going to ask me this, so I did prepare a little bit. And I
Great.
wrote down a few. It's hard to get a long list, right? Because there is no real silver bullet one at a time. It takes a bit of things to come together.
Sure.
But certainly, one of the key things is that the U.S. built probably the world's deepest public biomedical science base. And the NIH was created after World War II. We've spent quite a lot of money, which is an issue nowadays, right, in supporting basic research. And so the U.S. didn't just fund applied drug development. It funded the scientific, what you call like the substrate from which drug targets and platforms and biomarkers and spinouts come out of. It's the same for the COVID-19 vaccine. The reason it went so quickly is because a lot of work had already been done, right, by the time we needed it. And so a lot of that work was facilitated by a mixture of government spending on basic science and also the ability to take it to market because of the patent system that gives venture funding for startups and also gives incentives for large companies to build on these platforms, technologies that can be used in lots of things, which is, whatever people think about the vaccine, you really can't hate mRNA technology. I mean, it's silly. If you have some political idea about the vaccine, mRNA is going to cure a lot of people, probably a lot of people's family members. So, we need to put more money into these types of things. They really work well. All right, so you see I've slowed. I'm never going to get through the list at this pace. So, and of course we had the Bayh-Dole Act that allowed for a lot of this basic research that took place in universities to be licensed.
Because prior to that, there was no certainty around ownership, right, of things that were developed in university. So like the pathway from university to marketplace was like very sort of uncertain from an investment perspective, right?
Yeah, the ownership was uncertain and the management of it stayed with the government. And so there was almost, again, this idea that no one wants to invest in something that they don't know exactly what are the terms, the ownership and the terms. So giving the ownership to the universities allowed for structures to be put in place that could make this more certain. And even though it is, because it's already uncertain enough, right, what has to be done. So you need to have at least this fundamental certainty. And then, of course, we created the venture capital industry was extremely important because we have these, it's a strange industry, long lead times. Clinical risk, heavy regulation, uncertain reimbursement. So we needed a vehicle that could fund that type of risk. So you needed the government helping out on the basic research, but then in the next area, which was still very risky, you needed risk capital, and venture capital was important for that. We had this strong university, hospital, industry clusters around the world because you need to be able to not only have good science, but have good scientists combined with managerial talent and IP know-how and licensing and risk. You need all of this to be kind of bundled together. You can't have it in different places. The U.S. has done pretty good on these clusters, building the FDA out to be seen as a globally respected approval pathway. That also creates a lot of confidence. You can see every time you're really taking risks, you need to try to reduce the risk-taking in as many areas as possible to push people over the hump. And as you know, the U.S. does allow for high returns on this, which then incentivize people to do things. There was a colleague of mine from Harvard, Ariel Packus. He did a study that showed that definitely the Americans were shouldering the brunt of most of the cost for innovative drugs, but still, even doing that, it was still in the interest of Americans to do that because it was adding so much benefits to health and longevity. So So by allowing there to be a return, we bring these new medicines into life, which increases our quality of life. And then, of course, we had specifically about patents. We did allow for the product patents to come earlier than other places. You can see in other countries and regions not having products on the drug itself, but on the manufacturing process. Again, made it more difficult to control and therefore less likely to invest. And maybe the last thing I'll point out is that large pharma and the small biotechs have really been able to create a complementary relationship rather than just separate worlds. So again, with IP, it's important from a transaction perspective because you have these small companies, they come up with something, they generate risk capital, they de-risk to a certain level of clinical trials, and then they can license or be sold because of the IP, can be transferred to another company to take it the rest of the way. Something that's often overlooked about IP. It's not just blocking, it's about allowing things to be transferred and moved in a market, which in the US is critical to the pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's the CliffsNotes. I hope that was.
No, that was wonderful. How did Hatch-Waxman fit into all of that?
Yeah, so the Hatch-Waxman came in, I think it was 1984. This was after the Bayh-Dole Act. So those two together were very important. Hatch-Waxman was a great compromise. You know, when you read about the Hatch-Waxman legislation, you kind of become, how do you say, you're like, wow, people could come together to produce really good legislation. And so it was the bargain, right? So we allowed the pharmaceutical companies to patent products, and we even allowed through Hatch-Waxman to get a 5-year additional exclusivity and other exclusivities because of the fact that it takes so much of the patent period to develop the drugs. At the same time, we created a really clear pathway for generic entry, right? That's what we want. We want innovation to be maximized, and then we want access to be maximized. The problem in the rhetoric is that they're overlapping them. You know, there's an innovation, and then there's access. You know, there's no generics without the innovative drugs. So you have to manage this. Hatch-Waxman is done, I think, is a great legislation, and you know how many years later now it's still working, I think, rather well, and it's almost amazing in the rhetoric today to think that both sides got together and this was able to be put forward.
That's actually why I asked the follow-up specifically on Hatch-Waxman, because I want to put a pin out into the ether just to prove that at least at one point in time that it was possible for Washington to collaborate on something, you know, constructive that was sort of paid dividends for, you know, for decades, right? It's like you put these two things together, and you know, you give investors enough confidence that if the science works, that you're going to have this legally protectable, you know, commercially financeable asset at the end, and you have a framework in place where you can, like you said, you marry, you know, public science, private capital, startups, patent rights, you know, pharma, and it all comes together, you know, in this, you know, incredible innovation in healthcare.
And to bring both sides together, right? Because usually,
yeah.
So not only the Congress bipartisanship, but then the both sides of the innovative pharma and the generic to come up with something that actually came out to be a bit of a win-win in the way that it worked out, right?
Really amazing. I hope our representatives can kind of sort of go back and study what happened and, you know, and how that happened, because it'd be great if we could accomplish such things in the future with maybe, say, like AI, just for instance. But okay,
these stories were always interesting too, because I think the Bayh-Dole Act was signed. I heard a story that it was signed like the last thing that Carter signed as he headed to the helicopter when he was leaving the presidency. So you have all these interesting stories, right? So that could be a good podcast. You know who knows everything? I mean, Adam Mossoff knows everything about this. So and you know him, so
we'll go a little deeper on that. We've covered STTR and SBIR quite a bit, and some of the strings side of it, like what do you need to be aware of as an inventor in terms of, you know, long-term, you know, ownership rights, but not enough on, you know, on this piece, on the, you know, what it enabled, for sure. So I'm glad we got that in today. So So everything was blissful in DC, and we got this great, highly productive pharmaceutical industry, and so but things were awesome until they weren't. A lot of lobby and PR money has been spent on, as we mentioned before, some common narratives that are, visually compelling, albeit misleading, metaphors and imagery. And a lot of the current policy debates center on these phrases like evergreening and patent thickets and patent monopolies. Can you explain what those terms mean, what they're referring to, and whether those narratives are actually backed by any evidence?
Yeah, this is, again, all these terms are used typically pejoratively, right? They're pejorative labels to support a narrative, which typically doesn't hold up under empirical scrutiny, like most composite, patent troll. I don't like names that are labels at all, even, predatory infringers. If everyone's a troll, then all of a sudden everyone's a troll or a predator, and there's a lot of different types of behaviors, some rational and some irrational. So again, if Eira's goal is to be the kind of voice of reason and be empirical, then we have to understand what do we mean. And of course, when it comes to evergreening or patent thickets, basically the question that's being asked or the hypothesis that's being put forward is whether a lot of other patents, secondary and patents related to formulations and related to use and other follow-on innovation, whether the patents on all that are somehow extending the life of the original drug that can then become generic in the grand bargain that was Hatch-Waxman. And that's an okay question to ask, right? So there's nothing wrong with asking the question. The problem is just looking at it very simply and then drawing a conclusion. And when you look at it very specifically, for example, on this duration question, because that's the main thing is, right, that they say, well, instead of getting the 14 years that Hatch-Waxman was talking about roughly, people are getting more than that. Well, when you look into it, you find that new small molecule drugs on average are only about 12 to 14 and a half years of real market exclusivity before generic entry. So you can't just look hypothetically at when are patent dates and this and that. You have to look to find out when did the generic enter, right? Plus, we also have innovative competition. Look at the GLP-1 drugs, right? So even before all the generics are going to start to come in around the world now, you've had competition between Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly and others coming into the game for the next round of innovative drugs, while there's going to be a competition for the generics. So again, these terms are used. Again, I wouldn't mind. So if you break them apart into the fundamental question, does the Hatch-Waxman grand bargain still work? Are there things that have happened over the last 40 years that have allowed things to move in a way that is different from that? Those are good questions. We should ask those. But we have to look at them scientifically and listen to the empirical evidence. And that's basically why we have Eira, because I think we've lost that ability to do that, and we just have to have that.
Yeah, in addition to the data you were citing about the the exclusivity window, the Center for Protection of Intellectual Property just published some data too. So the FDA data is showing that nearly 90% of all prescriptions in the U.S. are filled with generic medicines. 90%,
Yeah.
that's up from 14.5% in 1980. I mean, that's a pretty compelling indicator too, right? That like things aren't going off the rails. Like the system is doing what it was designed to do, in that regard.
And at the same time, we lead the world in the most new drug development. So we have 40% of new drugs released worldwide. So we're leading in both the creation of new drugs and in the use of generic. And I would have to think that Hatch and Waxman are pretty happy. Would be pretty happy about that. Okay.
What do you? And maybe it's everything we've just talked about. But why are policymakers getting this wrong? What are they misunderstanding about the relationship between innovation and access to drugs? Like if you had 5 minutes on the Hill, with with the help committee and every other Orwellian doublespeak named committee and what would you tell them?
I think the thing that we've talked about a lot already is the message. It's not, so the message is simple. It's that you need both innovation and access, but you don't necessarily want to take away one for the other. So you need them both. And you're going to have to step up and explain why, if we don't invest properly in innovative drugs, so like if the constituency wants all these new drugs to be cheap right away, it's completely rational. They have to be able to do the tough job of explaining that if 20 years ago the people felt the same way, you wouldn't have the cheap drugs that you have now, right? And so we have to balance both, and we create a system that tries to maximize both. And we try to look at the system to make sure that nobody's gaming it and how to improve upon it. But there's not just an obvious bad conduct here that's allowing the drug prices, at least in relation to the patent system. There could be other issues, but in relation to the patent system, it is doing its job very well. It's an incredibly successful policy instrument. And then maybe the focus can leave talking about the patent issues and talk about other issues where there might be inefficiencies in reducing the price of, or access and the price of drugs. That can definitely be discussed. But it's very hard for people really need to know that this is not only about them, it's about health for their children and going forward, and that this is the system that they're benefiting from today.
I like the time travel exercise in that. It's like, oh, I want a fully grown tree today. Well, you should have planted it 20 years ago, right?
It's a little like that. No, that's right.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing to tell people that have an illness and struggle.
Yeah.
So it's, I understand. I try to treat everyone as, that they have rational concerns and that the system can never be perfect, but we try to do it as good as we can and an understanding of it. Maybe, like we said, if we went back in time and we asked people, how would you do this? They have the thing, Adam will like this, behind the Rawlsian veil of ignorance, right? We don't know who we're going to be or if we're going to get a disease or not. How would we create a system? I like to think that most people would create a very good balance between innovation and access. I would think so.
Yeah.
But in the moment, you might prefer one over the other, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you really hit on something there too that I think is, and this is not just the case with this conversation. It seems like it's true with like everything that becomes divisive in political footballs and polarized. But it's like you have to acknowledge the human element of this in the middle ground, right? That is, I mean, drugs aren't inexpensive. It would be great if we could get more people, everybody, access to breakthrough, medicines. Like those are for sure problems. We gotta make sure that we're solving the right problems. But it doesn't make sense to say, patents are evil, and it doesn't make sense to dismiss those very real concerns, those very real health, life and death concerns of very real people. And it's like you have to acknowledge the realities of both sides from that. And that's like that human element sort of ends up getting stripped from this conversation all too often. And so I'm really glad you mentioned that. I struggle a little bit because, I don't ever want to be accused of being a shill for big pharma. Like, big pharma is like far from perfect in my book, but like drug patents are essential. And so like I'm going to go to bat and I'm going to fight for the drug patents like all day, every day. But there's nuance in the human component to this, and that's very, very real. And like people seem like cold, heartless, detached, whatever. When you take that piece out of the conversation, I don't think you're really going to move the conversation forward unless you can acknowledge that as part of it.
Right. I think. Well, yeah. Go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, I was just saying, and I think the hard part is acknowledging that this, to your point, Josh, the system isn't perfect, but you can't throw everything. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And I think you said something too to that effect, Bo, that let's figure out the right problem to solve, right? And maybe this isn't the problem to solve. If you want to talk about access and cost and things like that, maybe there's some other things that can be done, but there are things that are working clearly.
Exactly.
So, unfortunately, the problems for the industry, they don't end with innovation policy in Congress, but often extend into the courts. Earlier this month, the Supreme Court ruled on a case involving skinny labeling. Could you tell us, like, what was at the heart of that dispute? Why is the Hikma ruling so consequential? And, for the benefit of our audience, can you explain what is meant by skinny labeling?
It sounds like a side effect from the GLP-1 drug, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah, so the skinny label is actually quite an interesting, phenomenon in the sense that when when new compounds are created, they're usually created for a specific use, but people continue to innovate to find other uses for the same drug, which is great because you don't have to spend as much time coming up with new, completely new compounds. And in that, we want to give people exclusivity on these new uses, but we don't want them to necessarily, we want to create a generic version of the old uses. But but the difficult part is it's the same drug, right? Being sold basically with two different labels. So the skinny label means that you can use the drug for the generic purpose, but not the same drug for the proprietary new use one that we wanted to incentivize to create because that's better for society. And so you can see it's a really great idea to do this, right? To really split this thing off, but because it is the same drug, that to manage the behavior and how this is done has to be governed properly. So the Hikma case was about the idea that that Hikma launched a generic version of Amarin's Vascepa drug, and the accusation was that Hikma wasn't doing enough, or to explain that this was only for the generic use, not for the proprietary use, or was doing too much to try to make it look like it could be used for both. And the Supreme Court 9-0 said, well, at least legally, what they didn't rise to the level of induced infringement. A discussion of where that line is good, right? I mean, that we need to know where that line is, and people need to, because they need to know how to behave, right?
Yep.
Because the idea of skinny labels is just great, but it is. I mean, we just got to accept that it is a little tricky, right?
Yep. Yep.
So the Supreme Court found that it wasn't induced infringement. The question, but they did leave open the fact that there can be induced infringement, but it has to rise to a certain level for that. So it's basically just setting the line. So it didn't really take away what the Hatch-Waxman skinny label mechanism. It's just trying to define this line, and of course, it's very important to see that the skinny label, it doesn't become too political of a football in that way, because this is actually an extremely useful mechanism of the grand bargain. And so we really need to keep it this way. And hopefully that now people will understand where the line is. This will allow for things to be done in a better way. And this won't necessarily cause a whole lot of issues. I know that there's a bill in Congress now that's looking to address this some way as well. I think it's useful to, again, find some certainty about how to do this in a good way so both sides know. I just want to believe that we can solve this, and I think it's important to solve this and to clarify this in a good way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, really, really highlights the delicate balance between, generic entry and, protecting new patented uses. And both sides of that equation would benefit tremendously from clarity on that, right? I mean, that sort of uncertainty can be paralyzing. So yeah, I mean, hopefully the needle moving a little bit on that. So I'd like to round out the conversation with some more recent events and hot topics, because what would a 2026 podcast be without some talk about AI and weight loss drugs? So like everything else, AI is rapidly changing drug discovery. Do you think the patent system is keeping up, and what legal challenges should, practically speaking, just ground this in some takeaways here, what legal challenges should firms and investors be considering?
Yeah, that's good. These are interesting issues. So if we look at AI, there is a core tension here that is genuinely novel. Can machines be an inventor, right? And as a non-lawyer, I have to say I find it interesting when the lawyers look back into rather old statutes to try to infer whether the people who wrote those statutes allow inventorship to go to a machine or only to a human inventor, when obviously at that time they were only thinking about humans as possible. So it may be necessary to create new legislation going forward to deal with this, because looking back, you're looking back into a time where no one thought about this as a possibility. So you're not really going to find, you're going to find exact language, but you're not going to find any thought behind it from this perspective. Where it fits, where it becomes critical in relation to biopharma is that let's say that an AI helps to invent a new compound, and maybe it's allows to do that in a quicker amount of time, which is great. If it wasn't allowed to be patented, the problem would be is that we still need to spend the $2.5 billion, right, to get it out onto the market. So we have to go back to first principles. I think AI is forcing the patent system to go back to first principles and say, why do we need a patent? And we need a patent not only to incentivize inventing, we maybe more importantly needed to incentivize investment. So no one's going to invest in an AI-created drug if there's no exclusivity, because it's the need for exclusivity. Like we said, you're weak in that position. So this could be a reason why we need new legislation if the courts can't thread the needle here, because the inventorship is one thing, but the investment is another. And in this case, it would be a problem to basically not be able to invest in new drugs generated by AI. That would be bad for everyone, I would believe. So for now, I think companies are being clear that there's humans in the loop and that it fits the statutory arrangement. But, maybe in 5 years, the computers are getting better. Maybe we have to create new legislation for that world where we take AI into account from the beginning.
It's interesting that the inventorship piece of that with AI. If you kind of do the first principles deep dive on it, right? It's like, okay, well, intellectual property rights are born in the Constitution. The only time the word right is even used in the Constitution is pre-Bill of Rights. This was like a big time, sort of philosophically in the exploration of natural rights, life, liberty, pursuit of property. And so, we give inventors, right, individual humans, the right to sort of possess property from the conception of their idea. If we're really going to talk about inventorship and intellectual property rights with machines, we're really kind of talking about like machine rights more broadly, right? Like in a natural rights kind of context. I mean, if we take this all the way back. So man, there's a big old can of worms there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think you have to leave the natural rights perspective, because now we're not talking about people. We're definitely talking about people benefiting.
Yeah.
That tends to be a more utilitarian perspective, right? And from that perspective, it would be silly not to allow for exclusivity, because that would be completely needed.
Yeah.
Until the machines are also doing in silico, drug trials in 3 seconds. Until that happens, we still need this, and maybe the law doesn't allow for it. And we have to be careful sometimes to not get so captured in the way the patent system was created to block us from using it in a new way that we need it, right?
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, we got to facilitate the quid pro quo, right? The public disclosure in exchange for the exclusivity. As long as we're doing that, I think we're probably fine. So the other hot topic one, you hit on this a little bit earlier, but what does the GLP-1 landscape tell us about how the patent system is functioning?
Yeah, this is fun. The GLP-1 drugs are very interesting. I think that, to me, I see them as a case. I see these drugs as a case study on the effectiveness of the patent system as a policy instrument. We had someone spent a lot of money to come up with a new way to treat obesity and diabetes. I think, if I'm correct, isn't part of the understanding of it coming from the basic research on the venom of the Gila lizard? And so it comes from something that's very basic research oriented, right? So again, people putting money into it, then people investing in taking it forward. And then once this pathway was found, and it was very successful, other companies jumping in, even on the innovative stage. So even in the innovative part of the bargain, you had competition. And now it's coming off of patent protection. And I think in other countries in the world, other than the US and Europe, they're already talking about 10, 20, 30, 40 companies putting out generics around this. And of course, the companies are continuing to innovate. So, you had injections that you had to do every day, then injections once a month, and then a pill. So that's all improving, but all the older technology that is still very useful becomes a highly contested generic market available for very little to solve problems that are incredibly important. So it's almost a perfect example of the policy instrument working. But all I hear typically in the press is like, oh, this is taking so long, and oh, the companies now are going to lose money. They knew that the patent cliff was coming. That's the bargain. And it took so long. It took what it took. No one was upset they didn't have this drug when it didn't exist, right? But this is the human element. But now that it exists, why does it take so long? Well, okay, this is how the system works, and it works extremely well, because if you start to toy with it, then you don't get it. But then, like I said, there's no one advocating for the drug that never came to existence.
Yep.
So I think it's a great case study for this, and I want to write something on this in a kind of cheerful way, because there's often not enough. There's not enough in this debate. People saying, "Well, this worked great," right? So,
yes. We need the cheerful warriors. All right, so I just want to throw out some closing thoughts as we wrap up. I kind of try to take mental notes as we go along here. See if I can kind of put something together in a nice little bow. And you can tell me what I missed, and if I'm getting any of this wrong.
You can tie it up in a bow, no pun intended.
Oh, yeah, that's a yes, and a Dr. Bow. All right, so the role that IP protections play in drug development and healthcare is this is a conversation that we need to be having. Part of that conversation is, unfortunately, increasingly popular narrative that patent protections are just driving up drug prices, and that they're limiting access to the medical breakthroughs. In addressing that, we do need to be abundantly clear that the problem is not the access and affordability concerns are fake. The problem is that bad narratives lead to bad fixes, right? Mm-hmm. And we have to solve the right problems, and we have to address the right root causes, rather than reaching for convenient boogeymen. And so, without reliable patent protection, far fewer investors would fund the long, expensive, and very uncertain path from discovery through approved medicine. With reliable patent protection, the drugs still have an enormous upfront cost. The clinical and regulatory risk is there. The public disclosure is there. But it's followed by a finite and potentially valuable period of protected commercialization. And it's that exchange that makes the risk legible enough that capital and partnerships and commercialization can actually form around it. And so it's sort of another classic, bridge versus blockade patenting conversation. But we have to get this right. It's literally a matter of life and death. What did I miss?
No, I think you framed it well. It's a fundamental policy issue. It should be discussed. It needs to be discussed rationally. Do we want to side more on access? Do we want to side more on innovation? That should be discussed. It is a question for society to think about. But what we can't have is, like you said, we can't have our cake and eat it too. So we have to think about it, and we have to make these decisions not based on rhetoric or self-interest. They have to be based on empirical evidence, and they need to be followed up to see how it's working and improve and improve and improve on it. So, and that's what we want to do at Eira. We're hoping to play a positive role in that development.
Wonderful. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Both, thank you so very much for your time today, for joining us, and this has been an illuminating conversation.
Thanks, Josh, for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
All right, that's all for today, folks. But if you're wondering what you can do to help, you can do what we're doing, and that's sharing these concerns and the very real human stories behind them to help raise broader public awareness. Please like, subscribe, and more importantly, share. Thanks for listening, and remember to check us out at aurorapatents.com for more great podcasts, blogs, and videos covering all things patent strategy. And if you're an agent or attorney and would like to be a part of the discussion, or an inventor with a topic you'd like to hear discussed, email us at podcast@aurorapatents.com. Do remember that this podcast does not constitute legal advice, and until next time, keep calm and patent on.